The US-Iran agreement on a ceasefire is a step back from the brink after weeks of escalation. It is crucial that negotiations for an enduring solution to this conflict continue, and we as EU we will continue to coordinate with our partners, and we stand ready to support the efforts of diplomacy and those of our partners in the region in this direction. The High Representative is in Saudi Arabia today in this direction, as well as a strong sign of solidarity to our partners in the Gulf that have been targeted by Iranian indiscriminate strikes against their territory. Obviously, our discussion will also be on the situation and the matter in hand, efforts to reach a de-escalation, including the recent ceasefire accepted by the US and Iran under Pakistani mediation, that we also salute for their efforts. As to our priorities, because this is also the bulk of your question, for us, the EU, our priorities remain preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon and to put an end to its destabilizing activities, including its ballistic missile program, as well as guarantee freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz in line with international law and the law of the sea.
So first of all, on the lifting of sanctions, where do you stand? What conditions are you going to impose on Iran in order to lift any sanctions, if that comes to happen? And second, what is your position regarding Lebanon and its inclusion in the ceasefire deal? Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. On your first question, no comment because it is speculative and hypothetical from your side. Second question, from our side, our position has been clear from the outset and we will not change it. We call on Israel to cease its operation in Lebanon, respecting Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I will also stress that we are fully supporting UNIFIL in carrying out its mandate, and that any attacks against UNIFIL are unacceptable, must stop immediately.
On the call to Israel to stop attacks on Lebanon, do you think that these calls will translate in some way in some diplomatic pressure? Will the EU use a sort of leverage to get this goal? And if the European Commission considers these Israel actions in Lebanon an invasion? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have made our position quite clear from the outset with a statement from the High Representative herself when the developments have erupted. And I think our language is crystal clear in the sense of, one, acknowledging that Israel has the right to self-defense in line with international law, acknowledging as well that at the same time Israel's response has been heavy-handed. Also calling for an end of the operations in Lebanon, while underlining the importance of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Channels of communication obviously remain open and are open, and this is part of diplomacy in terms of conveying our views in terms of how we see the situation on the ground. And I think that from a diplomatic perspective, the words that have been formulated, echoed and pronounced by the High Rep and from our side here have been quite clear in terms of how we see the situation on the ground and calling to an end.
I just wanted to ask about J.D. Vance. He's recently said that the U.S. has been disappointed by a lot of political leadership in Europe over the Russia-Ukraine war. I just wanted to ask if the Commission had a comment or thoughts about these comments. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't think, as a general practice, we really comment on comments. What I think we can comment on is our constant and staunch commitment to Ukraine, to obtaining a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. If you want the details, I'm sure Anita can provide you all elements on what we have been doing to support Ukraine in its war, to fight the war of aggression by Russia, and in reaching such a just and lasting peace. I think all our actions since March 22 have demonstrated this, but I don't think there's a lot more to add at this stage here.
Referring to the previous question about Vance, he didn't only comment, let's say, on Hungary, on the elections there, but also visited Hungary, as we know, yesterday, and he said explicitly that he came there in order to support Prime Minister Orbán in his election campaign. So the question is, I would like to ask you whether EU considers, the Commission considers this as an example of election influence or interference in the Hungarian elections, also different but still interference as the allegations about Russian online manipulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mose. As I said, I will not be commenting on remarks that the US Vice President has given when visiting a EU member state 5 days ahead of national elections. What I can say is that we are committed to ensuring that elections are the sole choice of the European citizens of the member states in which the elections are taking place. This is a commitment we have always confirmed and demonstrated through all our actions, and I will not be adding more to that.
The Vice President Vance statement yesterday during the press conference with Prime Minister Orban, the allegation he made is quite serious. I quote him when he said that EU bureaucrats are responsible for one of the worst examples of foreign election interference. So even if you will not comment on this comment, can you clarify if the European Commission is interfering in the Hungarian elections? Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. I will ask Thomas perhaps to join me on this one. Anita, thank you. As I said, look, we have a US Vice President visiting a member state 5 days ahead of elections. We will not be commenting specifically on the remarks he made. What we will be doing is confirming that we are acting in a way to ensure that elections are always the sole choice of our citizens and nobody else. Thomas can provide you more elements on this.
Indeed. Thanks, Ariana. This is what the European bureaucrats have been doing, is to set out a strong framework to make sure that the elections remain in the hand of our citizens. Because if you look at it, and if you look at the concerns that we have, and they are justified, who is silencing political voices? It's online platforms. Who is manipulating algorithms? Again, online platforms. Who is boosting the visibility of their preferred choice? Online platforms. And we put the ball back where it belongs, with the DSA. And thanks to this, election interference is hardly possible by online platforms in Europe because we have this framework in place. Let me add, on top of this, from a European bureaucratic point of view, that we're not just enforcing a legislation like this. It was endorsed by our member states, and it received an overwhelming majority in the parliament also. So we have the legal obligation and the duty to enforce the legislation. We'll keep doing it because in elections, because in Europe, elections will not be the choice of big tech and their algorithms.
Thanks, Thomas. Let me see, perhaps Anita has something additional on this. Yes, no, maybe? Yes. I will ask Thomas to wait there just 1 second. Let's see. It's multiple parts.
Yes, on all the rest, all is that we can say that we have also our diplomatic channels, and we will be using this also to convey our concerns to our US counterparts.
And to also remind everyone that we have a joint statement with the United States. So that is the framework in which we build our relationship with our transatlantic partners. And we can, of course, address all possible concerns in that context if such concerns are in the mind of our partners. You have a question on this. Let's see if it's more for Anita or Thomas or me.
Thank you so much, Alex Caddier from TP World. Just following up, Anita, you said we have diplomatic channels to convey our concerns, but at the same time you're saying we don't comment on comments. What are your concerns? What will you be conveying? What is your message to the US here?
So we're not in the business of disclosing what we talk about with our partners, but if we would want to do so, you'll be one of the first to know.
Look, we have appropriate channels, appropriate frameworks, the diplomatic contacts, the joint statement. That is the framework in which we discuss matters of relevance with our partners, and that is where we will be bringing the discussions with the United States if they consider it something worthwhile pursuing with us.
Is part of this DSA framework about both the silencing of some political voices but also the amplification of others? So, for example, if an unnamed foreign politician would come to a member state during an election and make campaigning, either criticism of Brussels or campaigning in support of a candidate, the amplification of that message, would that be a cause for concern? An interference from an outside country in the European Union gets amplified by social media platforms. Is that a concern for the Commission?
That's one of the reasons I mentioned algorithms. So indeed, everyone in first place here in Europe is a place of freedom of expression. So everyone is allowed to express his personal views. We have always been extremely clear on that. Now, what you're not allowed to do is to use your platform or a social media platform to boost the visibility of certain political candidates and at the same time to reduce, to silence other political voices during elections. Here, you're clearly amplifying or distorting what citizens can see. This is a concern we have. This is a valid concern. This is a concern on which we have certain evidence already at our disposal. Now, indeed, we need to prove it.
Could you please remind us how much oil and LNG the EU receives through Strait of Hormuz, and how will the open of the Strait of Hormuz influence the energy market of the EU? How soon do you expect any improvements in terms of the energy crisis? Thanks.
Broadly speaking, we should be under no illusion that this crisis that currently impacts high energy prices will be short-lived. It will not be. As regards the volumes that we're getting via the Strait, we are getting around 8.5% of our LNG that comes from the Strait. As regards oil, including crude and products, it's around 7%. It mainly comes from Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And as regards jet fuel and diesel, it's around 40%, 40%. And obviously, as we know globally, the Strait transports or transits 20% of both oil and LNG, respectively. So it's a very, very important choke point, obviously, and the blockage has had. We've seen the impact it has had, and now, obviously, I am not in the position to speculate what will happen, how quickly it might have an impact. But what we can already foresee is that this crisis will not be short-lived.